first of all, Kirby, don't take this the wrong way, but congratulations, because if not for the efforts of, first of all, the victims, but secondly, those that stood up for the victims, then this trial would never have taken place in the first place.
That's true. I want to just say Happy New Year, George.
Happy New Year,
with Ghislaine Maxwell, pretty much in the biggest political scandal since Watergate, and no one really talking about the political implications. I think this is going to be a much better year because she is, at the very least, now in a jail cell with rats. And but I have a lot of information to give you about the case, and I want to thank you.
Yes, please feel free. The floor is yours.
Thanks. And I you know, it has been a 2.5-year effort. As you know, you've seen me do it, of tweeting day after day after day after day, of putting books out, of informing the public that these people were sex traffickers, that they were trafficking not only children, but, you know, women and men and boys who were vulnerable, who were easy to prey upon, who believed false promises, and then who were threatened. So a unanimous jury, as you know, has found Ghislaine Maxwell guilty of 5 out of 6 counts of sex trafficking. She ran in the circles of princes, presidents, and heads of states. And now she sits in a rat-infested cell where she belongs. The message that the attorneys pretty much gave the victims, this is something to be celebrated, but I'm sorry, it's not enough, because while the attorneys told the victims, hey, just say that the message that was sent in the Ghislaine Maxwell case is that no one is above the law. That is not true, because as we know, she was not just finding men. And by the way, what we discovered in the courtroom is that over $30 million passed from Jeffrey Epstein to Ghislaine Maxwell within the short period of time that she was being looked into. So she wasn't being looked into for her entire role with Jeffrey Epstein, which commenced after Robert Maxwell died in very late 1991 through the 2000s. This period that Ghislaine Maxwell was being looked into was a very narrow, focused from 1994 to 2004. So, 1997 to 2004. Only 4 victims. They're not talking about not only Prince Andrew, but Bill Clinton, Donald Trump, Kevin Spacey, Chris Tucker, Bill Gates, and others. So what this has actually done is that it has put a stop, right? A stop to the information about, well, who were these trafficked persons gifted to? In some cases, they were a gift. In some cases, they were paid for. It wasn't always just Jeffrey Epstein giving, let's say, someone allegedly like Prince Andrew a gift in the form of, in this particular case, Virginia Giuffre, because that's on the record. This was sometimes, he ran an upscale prostitution ring of the minors were, we can't call them prostitutes because that's not what they were, but that's really what he ran. He was a pimp of the highest order, but it's a political scandal. No one's talking about it, and I think it's time we talk about the biggest cover-up in history.
I'm determined to do that, and did so in my introductory remarks. The first question is the one you have just alluded to. Are we to believe that of all the hundreds, or certainly scores of girls, if not hundreds, that they were all being pimped by Ghislaine Maxwell for one man only, for Epstein only? Or is it not logically far more likely that he was sharing these girls with the rich and powerful friends that he very carefully drew around himself?
Well, it's very clear that it's the latter. Mainstream media would like for the world to believe Ghislaine Maxwell was madly in love with Jeffrey Epstein. That's a big lie. And that she would do anything for Jeffrey Epstein. That's a big lie. She was doing it for the money and for the sex, quite frankly. She was part of the acts of violence and of rape against these trafficked persons. And so, yeah, mainstream media has a narrative that they want to stick to. But in real life, as you and I both know, these men, Donald Trump, Bill Clinton, Prince Andrew, Kevin Spacey, Chris Tucker, Bill Gates, and a long list, including Ehud Barak and many, many others, were not hanging around Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell because they were the smart people. They were providing them with sex, bottom line. That's what they were doing. But on the other hand, and you just mentioned it before you brought me on, everything was taped. Everything was taped for the purpose of blackmail. And I've done more poking around and more studying and more talking and more investigative journalism. And the blackmail, we have to figure out what was the blackmail used for, right? So the blackmail was used in order to recruit more people. So they weren't just recruiting. We've only seen one side of the operation. We have seen them recruiting young children who then were taught to recruit other young children, right? So that you have a catch-22 situation. So where they can't go to anyone to help them. There's really no one to help them anyway, because all the politicians, all the local law enforcement, they're involved. But they were also targeting wealthy politicians that weren't very high up and businessmen who had, some money and some prestige into then flipping, right? Become an informant. Tell us stuff that we need. So flipping them, that's part of what they were doing as well. But no, the thing is, there's only so much that advocates like myself and the others that are putting in a lot of hours can do. Because look, mainstream media, even as early as today, called her a socialite instead of a child sex rapist.
Yeah, that's happening here on a daily, hourly basis. I don't know if you know that the BBC actually put up for interview Alan Dershowitz without pointing out that he himself has been accused of using these young girls. And there he was on the BBC batting for Ghislaine Maxwell and Prince Andrew.
So that was not a surprise to me, and I'll tell you why. I know you just had on a very nice man who I happen to like and admire from Israel.
Yeah.
And frankly, I have a lot of really good friends in Israel. When Ghislaine Maxwell initially was thought to be missing, I called them up and I'm like, hey, can you poke around? There are nice places to go in Jerusalem. And so I was like, if she's there, she's going to be in these places. But no, they couldn't find her. But look, this was a Mossad operation. I don't want to disparage anyone, but this was a Mossad operation. Alan Dershowitz has worked for the Mossad for forever. I know this personally, but also there's a very good example. Ghislaine Maxwell's sister, Isabel Maxwell, about 10 or 12 years ago, Martin Dillon and Gordon Thomas were getting ready to publish the book, Robert Maxwell, Israel Super Spy. Isabel Maxwell was living in San Francisco with Al Seckel, who was a bigamist, and really he didn't die. He faked a death. But anyway, she gets on an airplane. She goes to Israel. She sits down with the prime minister. I forget who it was at the time, and with the head of the Mossad. And she's trying to get the book not to be released because she doesn't want the information about her father being a spy who was already outed by Seymour Hersh to get out into the public. So she comes back to the United States, but what happens? Alan Dershowitz, and as you have seen, and many people have seen, that Alan Dershowitz gets free access to the press whenever he wants. So does Daphne Barak. So do Ian and Kevin Maxwell. So does Ghislaine Maxwell. They have this ability. So what does Alan Dershowitz do? he goes and he writes a very lengthy piece, destroying the book, saying how horrible it is. And frankly, I'm very honored right now because that's exactly what they're trying to do to me. So that at the time, these authors, prestigious authors, with awards, just really top-notch investigative journalists, were thinking and scratching their heads, why would a professor from Harvard, Alan Dershowitz, be writing this about us? Well, then years later, they discover, oh, he's connected to Ghislaine Maxwell, he's connected to Jeffrey Epstein. We get it now. So that, of course, I knew they were going to bring out Alan Dershowitz because he is their consigliere. However, it backfired. It backfired.
Yes, it certainly did. Here, the BBC are conducting an inquiry into whose blunder it was to put him up as an impartial witness when in fact he's party pre to the case, big time. It's the sort of BBC inquiry that will probably lead to the people responsible being promoted and their salary enhanced. When can we expect sentencing of Maxwell?
So I want to explain that to you. Sentencing in New York can take about 8 weeks. And the steps are, there's a pre-sentence report. So there's an investigation of her background. So whether she's been ever arrested, her schooling, her banking situation, they do a thorough investigation of her life. Now, if her life had been someone else's, in the UK, she had been stopped and arrested for a DUI, I believe in the 1990s. I'm trying to remember the year. But also one of my friends lives in the UK, Matthew Steeples, and he discovered, because he's been poking around, that in 1994, in one of the 2 homes that Robert Maxwell helped buy for Ghislaine, that she was running a house of ill repute in 1994. So the local police were staking out that property for a whole week. And the way they did it was they got access to the property across the way. For 1 week, they had their men sitting there with binoculars looking at the stream of women and men going in and out of the house. And guess what? It stopped. Of course, it had to be courtesy of her good friend, Prince Andrew. But anyway, so none of that stuff is going to be looked into, obviously, because with this pre-sentence report, these are not documented crimes, right? She's gotten away with a lot of crimes, but they look into her family history, they look into her employment, and then they develop a guideline, which they then give to the judge, who then determines what's going to happen. This said, she faces, if from the 5 counts, it's about 65 years.
Wow.
If the judge looks at this and even gives her a sliver of that, it could be 20 years. So de facto, she's facing a life sentence. However, what happens at this point is that this is when they turn around and the prosecution says to her, hey, we're going to be sending you to jail. This is probably, you're going to be in jail for the rest of your life. She just turned 60. So they allow her to do a post-verdict cooperation. At this point, she can decide to give up names, except she's the head. During the trial, the people who were in Jeffrey Epstein's employ and in her employ described her as the number 2 person. So Jeffrey Epstein was the number 1. He's gone. Ghislaine Maxwell was described as being the number 2. So who is she going to give up? She's not going to give up Bill Clinton, who's in it up to his neck and who is very close to Ghislaine. But there's a possibility that the only way out for her is to give up Donald Trump. Donald Trump has been exposed by a couple of writers. Let me just find that information for you, of having, he not only did he wish her well, but he considered giving her a pardon before he left office. He did not do so on the advice of one of his close counsels. And the reason cited was that, well, if he let her go on the federal level, that she would then be pursued on a state level. But she's only got this bargaining chip, so she can decide to say Donald Trump, because she has gone on the record to say that she and Jeffrey Epstein had tapes of both Bill Clinton and Donald Trump. Will she turn on Prince Andrew? She may not turn on him, but she has already damaged his case substantially, because it has now, the fact that Ghislaine Maxwell has just been found guilty, 5 out of 6 counts of sex trafficking children, the most disgusting thing any human being can do is just to do that to children. Well, that means that Virginia Giuffre's credibility has risen and Prince Andrew's has dropped. So why this man is not reaching into his pocket and writing a check and keeping his dear old mother from this trauma at her advanced age does not make sense. I see him having to write a check and run the other way, because this can turn at this point in time, while the case that Prince Andrew is facing is a civil lawsuit. And it's a shame that that it is the victim, Virginia Giuffre, who has to chase Prince Andrew to get the rights. That, I don't know what the United States pays taxes for. It should be the federal government going after Prince Andrew. And it can turn right now, because Ghislaine Maxwell has heard that Prince Andrew has made statements that, well, so what for Ghislaine? Well, I don't know she's going to like that, because she, as you know, she's a very vain, self-centered woman. So if she decides to turn and say, okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and offer myself up to, she can no longer be a witness for, but she can be a witness against. So this can now then turn 180%, and Prince Andrew could be facing federal charges. So if I were him, I would pull out a check.
How about this for a possible scenario? Maxwell delivers up Donald Trump, who otherwise might be the next president of the United States, delivers evidence about him that either sends him to jail or certainly destroys any prospect of re-election for him, and Joe Biden gives her a pardon.
That's possible. They're friends. People don't seem to understand that Joe Biden has known Ghislaine Maxwell for a very long time. One of her closest friends lives in Philadelphia. Joe is from Philadelphia. Look, whatever happens to Ghislaine Maxwell is going to happen front-facing. So the public will see one thing. If she's put away in jail, she's going to go to a sort of a minimum security jail. I just want to give you some more information before my time runs out.
Yes.
So she can't really be put into sort of a regular type jail because of her sex offender position, right? So a minimum security facility exclusively is ruled out because she's a sex offender, and so they will kill her if she goes there. So she will go into a low security prison. However, compared to where she is today, a low security prison, it's going to feel like a resort to her, because these places have classes and they have places for exercise. But I do want to address, if I may, the rumor that is going around because of a Trump operative saying that, the documents have been sealed. That was a rumor that mainstream media took and ran off with it. The guy's name is Jack Prosebiec, and he is just someone who used to spread lies for Donald Trump. So I have looked at the case record. I have had attorneys look at the case record because I knew I was coming on your show today. And no, there's been no further sealing of records. What happened during the court proceedings were that the documents were redacted, heavily redacted. Not everything was shown to the people who were sitting in the audience, many of whom were independent media and or someone like Julie K. Brown, who represents mainstream media.
Well, look, I'm glad that you brought us up to date on all of that. I hope Maxwell is not surprised by her suicide next week or the week after. I hope that she stays alive to properly suffer for the crimes that she has committed.